Hello and welcome to today's NEASC Virtual Global Forum, Supporting and Empowering Students Through SEL, a conversation with students and school leaders. It's great to see the conversations already started in the chat with so many people from around the world joining us. My name is Kelly Christian. I'm a member of the leadership team here at NEASC, and I'm joined by my colleague and co-host Allison Geary today. We're very pleased to be joined by a group of students from 4 very different schools. They have volunteered to come talk to you today about their experiences as they go back to school, what they need and what they need to be supported throughout this school year. They're going to be joined by a group of adult representatives from their schools that are going to talk to us about concrete SEL approaches, what's worked, what hasn't worked, and key takeaways that you can bring back into your own schools. Right now, I'm going to hand it over to my co-host, Allison, who's going to get things started.
Thank you, Kelly. So last week or 2 weeks ago in our last forum, we talked a little bit about the ways that the last 18 months has impacted adults in school settings. And today we want to continue that conversation by talking to students and specifically about the ways that the last 18 months has impacted our students. So why don't we get started and just do some introductions of our panelists. So we'll start with the American School of Guatemala with Dr. Ginger Carlson and Isabel. Go ahead.
Hello, good morning, everyone. My name is Ginger Carlson. I'm the Director of Curriculum Teaching and Learning at the American School of Guatemala. We have, as of this morning, I believe, 1,684 students in grades pre-K through grade 12.
Hello, everyone. My name is Isabel, and I'm a junior at the American School of Guatemala.
All right, and then our representatives from Griswold High School.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Marceline Dillon, and I am the Associate Principal at Griswold High School, which is a public school in Griswold, Connecticut. We have approximately 520 students, some of which are from Griswold, and then we also have students from 6 sending towns.
And I'm Coranda. I'm a junior at Griswold.
All right, and then John F. Kennedy High School in Waterbury, Connecticut.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Johnston. I'm the principal here at Kennedy High School in Waterbury. We serve a little bit over 1,300 students, grades 9 through 12.
All right, and why don't we have Ryan, Enoma, and Lucas introduce themselves.
So I am Ryan. I am a senior at Kennedy High School.
My name is Enoma, and I'm a senior at Kennedy High School.
I'm Lucas. I'm also a senior at Kennedy.
All right, and then our last school, St. Luke's School from New Canaan, Connecticut. Can we start with Jacqueline?
Good morning, everyone. My name is Jacqueline Nelson. I am the Director of Equity and Inclusion at St. Luke's School. We are an independent 5 through 12 independent school in New Canaan, Connecticut. I turn it over to you, Kari.
Good morning. My name is Kari Olson, and I am the Director of Counseling Services at St. Luke's School.
All right, and Faith and Macy?
Good morning. My name is Faith, and I'm in 9th grade at St. Luke's.
I'm Macy, and I'm in 11th grade at St. Luke's.
Perfect. Thank you. So we have a great group of panelists today. We're going to try to hear from as much as we can from all of them. So I'd like to start with a question for the students, which is how have the pressures of the last 18 months, which has included a pandemic, has included a lot of political strife in the US, has included a racial justice reckoning, how the pressures of everything that's happened over the last 18 months, how has that impacted your social and emotional health? Why don't we start? I'm going to start with Macy, if that's okay, and then we'll go to Coranda and Isabel.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I think in regards to your question, I would be remiss if I didn't mention the effects of the pandemic, because I think that has weighed most heavily on me personally, and I've seen that affect my friends and my peers as well. I think with a government lockdown was issued, various mental health struggles were revealed, and for others intensified. And I think that this isolation left teenagers, myself included, feeling alone, and also just in a state of sadness when we were not able to have that important social network that in-person learning created. And I think in the wake of the lockdown, we were tasked with reacclimating ourselves to simple interactions with friends. And for me, this brought a new wave of anxiety that I'm sure many teenagers can relate to. I think the vastly different extremes, we have isolation and loneliness, and then all of a sudden this overwhelming reacclimation to society instigated many mental health struggles that I continue to grapple with today, and I've seen people grapple with. So I'm hoping that through this discussion, we can talk about ways that we can mitigate that stress. So thanks again for having me.
Terrific. Thank you, Macy. Karanda?
I agree with a lot of what Macy said. Not being in contact with, our peers and classmates and teachers, we definitely dropped off on a lot of learning. It obviously got disrupted by the pandemic when we were all at home and everything got jumbled in March of 2020. We were all kind of thrown into the same situation where we had no idea what was happening and when our regular academics were going to resume. So I think at least for my peers and I, the academic track that we were on, that got disrupted by the pandemic, and we're still trying to recover now. And we're going to be recovering from that for the rest of our high school experience, as well as it was the academic drop off, as well as not being able to communicate as much as previously with our teachers and peers. So we also weren't having the social learning as well as the academic learning.
Great, thank you. Isabel?
Yeah, thank you. So I want to tell you a little bit about how it has affected me personally. So it has definitely made an impact in my emotional health by creating a new anxiety that I did not have before. Throughout the pandemic, I suffered very bad anxiety and had many ups and downs as ones too. Throughout the pandemic, there were days where it got so bad that I couldn't get out of bed, or my emotional health was at its lowest. So when it comes to social health, I could only talk to my friends and family through Zoom, which made it hard to keep some relationships. And of course, many relationships did not survive. But throughout the pandemic and throughout these months, things have progressed, and currently I am in a great mental state. And the schools reopening and having more moral support has definitely helped this change.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Let's hear from Lucas and Ryan.
Personally, as how the pandemic has progressed, I would say that it has taken an emotional toll on everyone. I would say that yes, through calls like Zoom and Google Meet, it would have distanced us, as we would much prefer to be closer in contact. We'd rather have a face-to-face discussion, but also it kind of shows how we're able to push past our limits and we can actually still communicate while there's a pandemic that has actually taken over the country, taken over the world. And it just shows that although we are distant, we are somehow still together. And I think it's kind of nice because as some people mentioned, how the pandemic has included some distresses to their life. It just shows that everyone can come together and help their mental issues and help their emotional standards. And that they and basically that if we all come together, we can progress farther, and that by working, we can make for a happier situation than what the pandemic has actually introduced to us, with all these deaths and all these sicknesses and illnesses. It's just a really negative standpoint, and just emotionally, I would say that through the work of everyone, I have developed more. I would say that at the beginning it was kind of a depressing state to be home and to be alone. But now that we've worked together and come together as a team, even meetings like this to discuss how we feel, it's really just shows our progress and evolution as humans to really push past of what could have been a disastrous effort. But I think overall, I would say that the social and emotional standard of everyone has gone up through the pandemic as we decide to really go past our problems and just show that we can actually keep going forward.
Okay, thank you. Ryan?
I think personally as a student, I did feel the pressure of that in the pandemic considering that it truly tested my relationships with both my family members and my peers. However, it did get really hard trying to manage that, because jumping from junior year to like a hybrid learning schedule, it was very difficult, because sophomore year we had to go completely online, not online, but in lockdown. Overall, I do think that I have grown from this pandemic, and I am probably the best the best version of myself than I was before.
Great, thank you. Inoma and Faith.
I guess as a student, when it first, I remember that I will never forget the day like that we closed, because we were talking about, oh, like what if we close? And then the next day we closed. So I just remember like 2 weeks later, just missing my teachers. I never thought I would miss my teachers. I missed them so much, because I love like being in class and interacting with everyone. So it was very difficult. We didn't do Zoom or Google Meets until like much later on. So we didn't really have like a face-to-face connection. With my friends, it was a bit difficult, because like their lives were also like haywire. Like they were also dealing with a lot of stuff. So I didn't really have like a lot of communication when we first went into our lockdown. I developed a lot of stress that I'm still dealing with till today, because of the pressures of, doing online schooling versus how it was in person. I'm a person who thrives more being around people and interacting with people and talking with people. And when we went into lockdown, it was catastrophic for me. I feel like that I'm more aware of social issues now with what happened on January 6th, 2021, and the Black Lives Matter protests in honor of George Floyd. I feel that like my mind has opened more with my struggles that I've experienced, and I'm just very grateful. Like I'm so grateful to to live here in the United States, number one, because I know other areas have suffered much more drastically and greatly than we have. And yeah, I just feel thankful that even though I struggled with stress and anxiety and some depression, I'm a better person.
Great, thank you. And Faith.
Hi. I definitely think that when everybody went into lockdown was probably one of the worst moments in my life personally. It was very hard for me to be able to focus on school and personal things that were going on in my life. And I feel like everything was just tying into one. And normally I was able to separate both of them. School was my escape from home. So I didn't have to worry about things that were going on at home, but I was doing school at home. So I had to worry about things that were going on at home and school at the same time. And then when school started opening back up again, I was home full time. That made everything a lot harder for me. My relationships with my friends were very odd. It was very hard to maintain stable relationships. I lost a few friends. Maintaining relationships with my parents was hard because I was home with them all the time, and I didn't know how to separate being at school and the stress from school and what was going on at home. And it was very hard for me because I'm the type of person to be able to make the best out of everything. And I feel like I wasn't able to do that. But I feel like this year, I was able to find more things about myself that I know what I love to do when I'm alone and how I can separate school and home and be able to balance out all the activities that I do and what goes on at home, the stress that I have, all the anxiety, everything.
Great, thank you. And I think, several of you have referenced this issue of parents, right? This has been really stressful, I think, for parents as well. And that's one group that we'd like to sort of try to put on a webinar in the future because, and many of you adults on this call may be parents and have had that experience of, how do we sort of navigate being parents and being educators and putting all this together. I know we had some conversations about that last year with teachers. All right. Well, thank you, students, for sharing those reflections. And I think it really speaks to what the issues are in terms of how students have been feeling over the last year and a half. So I'd love to now turn to the adults and talk about, what supports you've been able to provide in terms of social and emotional health for the students in your school. I know many of you have programs that you've started, you have outreach that you've done. So let's talk a little bit about that. And Marcy, why don't we start with you, and then we'll go to Jackie and Kari.
Sure. Well, I can say that we were very fortunate at Griswold High School because prior to the pandemic, we had a foundation of support in place. We've always prioritized social emotional learning for our students, and so it was helpful when the pandemic hit and we had to hit the ground running. We had some of these things in place. So we do have a social emotional learning committee at our school that's comprised of teachers and support staff. And we meet often to identify learning outcomes for students. We use it as a way to collect social emotional data, to analyze that data in order to make informed decisions about how we can assist students. Something that was very critical for us throughout the pandemic and following it is every week we meet as a support staff, and it's simple. We talk about kids for an hour. We talk about our at-risk students and what we can do to support them, and we come up with action plans to make sure that there are no students that are falling through the cracks and that we are really addressing their needs. In addition, we wanted to empower our students throughout this whole experience. And so with that, we have a student leadership council at school, and we also have a student alliance group. And it's an opportunity for students to share their experiences about what they see in the hallways, what they see in the classrooms. They talk about what is important to them and how we can help them better as adults.
Great. Someone wrote a question in the chat, and I had the same question. What is the data that you collect? What is social and emotional data? What does that look like?
Yeah, so this is something that, especially with students coming back this year, we're actually working with a group from EastCom that is coming in. And I'll just give an example. On yesterday, we did some learning walks through the school. And what we were doing is we were focusing on student engagement in the classroom. We also have a rubric that I can share out that we were looking at. What kind of feedback are teachers giving to students? Is it praise? How can we tell if students are engaged? What kind of activities are they doing? Is it active engagement or is it more passive? So it helps us when we go into the classrooms to really focus on what the students are doing, how they're interacting with one another. And then from that, we're able to talk about that. And also within the classrooms, I would say this was happening especially during the pandemic. We were asking teachers to give out surveys to students often about the learning activities, whether or not they felt connected to adults in the school. And so throughout that, we were able to really look at that as a whole and determine how we were doing.
Great, thank you. Jackie?
I think I'm going to start this answer for St. Luke's.
Great,
No
Kari,
problem.
thank you.
So at St. Luke's, we've been really trying to get well-being to be at the forefront of our conversation as a school. And we've really been starting with the adults first in many ways this year, trying to get adults to understand their role in social emotional learning and the health of our students. So we work closely with our advisory across the building and have been working with all of our teachers in almost that, also in that part where adults have to take care of themselves before they can be available for others. We have been starting to work with the ruler approach for our social emotional learning work here. And we're also starting to work with our parents and families and start to set that level of common language and common culture throughout the building.
Thank you.
And I would add, in terms of some more specific programs, so similar to what Marceline offered, our school has started the practice last year of administering surveys for students to give direct feedback to teachers so they have a sense of how they're doing, how they're feeling, how engaged they are. We've also this year, now that we're all back on campus, last year we were in a hybrid kind of mode, but we have student affinity groups based around race and gender and sexuality. Macy can tell you a little bit about the club that she has started. So in a lot of ways, trying to offer students pockets of community within community where they can feel connected to other students who are kind of struggling with and or navigating similar challenges, right? So we've got our GSA, we've got our Jewish affinity group, we've got an Asian affinity group. This year we have a Latinx Hispanic affinity group, and we have our Black Student Union, which is back online. And we've also, as a community, engaged in what we refer to as community goals for learning conversations, where we're actively bringing kids together. Student facilitators are working with their peers to engage in conversation around challenging issues or high impact issues, the ones that we're talking about this morning. And I would also only add that I think there's a lot of one-on-one listening that's happening throughout the building. I would imagine that's similar in all the schools, but students just need to know that we're here, right? And sometimes all they need is someone to listen. So thank you.
That's awesome. Thank you. Macy, should we just pause for 1 second? Do you want to tell us about your club that you started?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to. Last year, about halfway through the year, a friend and I co-founded the Mind Matters Club at our school at St. Luke's. And Mind Matters is a mental health club where we aim to reduce the stigma around mental health and try to open the conversation within our community. So it's been a great way to just facilitate conversation that we wouldn't normally have, especially because mental health currently is kind of a taboo topic and has been for a while. And we're trying to destigmatize that topic through my club. And I would say that as a group of students, we're really interested in creating a coalition of student groups that are working to reduce the stigma. So not only through St. Luke's, but engaging with other schools. So if anyone does have any groups or student groups, feel free to message me in the chat and I'd love to connect. Thank you.
That would be awesome. That would be a great outcome of the webinar. Thank you so much. Ginger, let's talk a little bit about American School of Guatemala.
Yeah, I think I just first want to acknowledge our students for sharing so openly and candidly. I think that that perspective that you've shared and each of them being unique has been perhaps the best thing that we can do is listen to that voice and the voices and the uniqueness is in that, because I think what works is when we're able to take kind of a balcony view and then also come down to the granular part and listen to the uniqueness that of how students have experienced things. And it's been very different across our ages as well. And so like we service a pre-K to grade 12 community, and it really is a very tight-knit community of parents and but a wide range of ages. And so being able to first recognize that this is a unique experience for everybody. Nobody in our lifetime has experienced a pandemic, especially in this way globally, right? Where we've all shut down and been isolated. And I think I really want to acknowledge what Lucas said about how this has raised our standards for what we expect of each other and how we come together. And I think what has worked for us is being able to hold two opposing ideas at once. So understanding that we have stress and anxiety, some depression, and that's some of those extremes, but then we also have some very extreme gratitude happening across the spectrum. And that, I think, has been valuable for us. We've also been re-looking at our structures of the resources that we use, the people that we have in place to support, and listening to students and what they need, and giving that power back to the students to say, what do you need? And then giving them the resources, time and space in their schedules to help create it.
Thank you so much. And I know we had a question in the Q&A about younger kids, so we'll get back to that, and maybe you can talk a little bit about how the strategies you've used with younger children. Let's hear from the folks at JFK, and Carla was there. Now she's not there, but let's see. Robert, why don't we start with you, and then we can hear from Carla.
Sure. I know Carla is actually handling something right now too, so she may be in and out. In terms of some practices at Kennedy, I would tell you that last year, what we did is we tried to shift the emphasis of what was going on in our advisory program. Previously, it had been a lot of goal setting, understanding graduation requirements, our portrait of the graduate, college and career readiness. And midway through the year, a shift was made to topics that were more involving self-awareness, self-management, social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making. And I'd love to be able to tell you that that shift was incredibly successful. I'm not sure it was, only because last year we were running a hybrid schedule with student and parent choice to be fully remote. So although we have over 1,300 students, last year I never had more than 400 students in the building at any one time. So many of our students were remote, and they were not necessarily engaged. So I'm not sure that the advisory program had the impact that we would hope it would have. The shift was a nice shift, but I'm not sure the message necessarily got out. This year, what we're trying to do is we're going to use a survey platform called Panorama to gather some social emotional data from students through surveys regarding their social emotional health, their connectedness to the school, engagement, and try to use the data that we gather from this actually for the first time this month to drive what we're doing in school. In listening to everyone, one thing that kind of hit me, and I'm surprised I hadn't thought of it previously, was the complete shock it must have been to students in March of 2020 to be going to school one day and then not the next day. And that initial shock in March 2020 was incredible. I know at Kennedy, we were not prepared for it. There was no Zoom set up, no Google Meet set up. Our students were simply in school one day and then disconnected from their friends and their teachers and everyone else the next. And that lasted for a little while. And we got better at it the following year, and we did the best we could. But that initial shock, I'm not sure many of our students have ever gotten over it. The 3 students from Kennedy, I was impressed. I didn't know what they were going to say today, but I was impressed in their initial comments of how positive they were in terms of their growth throughout the pandemic. They're all seniors. And I think the reason for that was because they had already built up strong relationships with some of their peers, and particularly with our staff members, because they had been around here for a couple of years before we were hit with the pandemic. And so they were able to lean on those positive relationships to get them through, and they're all going to graduate and go on to great things. What about our students that didn't have the time to build those relationships? What I've tried to emphasize with our staff, and I think they've done a pretty good job of it, is that those relationships that we built and we kind of took for granted that we always do that. That's just kind of who we are. No, we've got to be a little bit more deliberate in building relationships or reestablishing relationships, because we have some students that never set foot in this building since March 2020, and now they're juniors. Right. And so it's had to be a very conscious effort at building those relationships.
Yeah, thank you. Carla, would you like to introduce yourself and share any thoughts in terms of strategies that you've used to welcome the students?
I apologize for my lateness. Yes, I'm Carla Guglielmo. I'm one of the school social workers in the building. And so very early on, we, when COVID hit, like Mr. Johnson is saying, we were trying to establish how to connect virtually with all of these students. And so just as the teachers did, the counselors established Google Classrooms, and the teachers shared our links, and so that the students can come to us virtually, individually as needed. The teachers were very good about even virtually recognizing changes or needs that the students might have, or the struggles that they might have been experiencing, and would send us referrals, and we would reach out to students virtually. So we were able to connect. It was not perfect. It took a lot of communications, emails, phone calls, but we were able to connect in that manner to support them emotionally, throughout. One of the things that we also did was we went into all of the classrooms virtually, so that the students that were here in person, but as well as the students who were here virtually, went into all the English classrooms and talked about mental health, and really just wanting to, like someone else shared earlier, being able to talk about it, and that it's okay to talk about it, and we actually should be talking about it and sharing and reaching out. And so I had developed a mental health checklist that I worked on here at Kennedy, and I also shared it in a panel with Yale, some of the health professionals in our state, and also with school climate specialists within our state. And it was a very basic checklist, but it was something that was valuable throughout for students, especially who were not leaving their home. Also, adults, parents that were working from home and not physically leaving their home. A checklist to talk about just basic routines, our self-care routines, our bedtime routines, staying connected socially, and how do you do that while we need to also isolate. Some of the important points, identifying trusted adults, and how do I let those adults know? First of all, how do I determine what I need, and how do I let someone know that? How do I let people know and share what I need? So that mental health checklist was shared with our students, and then feedback was given. And from that, some individual and small group meetings were established with the support staff here in the building. And also daily schedule, just structuring their time and their day for those students who were either quarantining or home learning virtually. So really like getting down to like the nitty-gritty basics, day-to-day things that we don't typically think about, but focusing on that was a major focus last school year for the mental health support that we provided here in the schools. Right. And now this year, it's what Mr. Johnson is talking about, is reestablishing and establishing these relationships, really helping the students feel comfortable, getting back to structure, expectations of school. A lot of our students are struggling with that right now, and it's just a time of transition that I think is going to last a little bit longer than what we're used to.
Great, thank you. We definitely have folks asking for the checklist. So if you can either provide it in the chat, if you send it to us, we can also put it on our webpage for this.
I will do that.
Add that. Okay, great, thank you. So I want to get back to the students. Thank you, adults, so much for sharing that. But there's a question in the Q&A from Allison that says, we are coming out of 120 days of lockdown in Vietnam. We're currently still virtual, but there's hope in the near future we'll go back to school. From the student perspective, what advice would you offer for how we make the transition smooth, positive, and meet the needs of students? And that kind of goes along with the question that I was going to ask, which is, what have adults done that have made a positive impact on you, that has helped you? And again, with this question from Vietnam, what do adults need to do as students come back to school to make them feel comfortable? Karanja, it looked like you raised your hand. Karanda, sorry.
You're fine. I would say a lot of the students, they have not have engaging learning for, around, almost 2 years now. So it's going to be a big adjustment when they do go back to in-person learning. I would say make sure that your students aren't feeling like they're, falling off of a cliff as soon as they get all this work and the chaos of being in person after all this time, because, the effects of the pandemic are still lingering. And obviously if it's something new, it's going to feel very chaotic and not normal. So just make sure that your students are managing all of their work and the expectations that come with going back to school full time after being out for almost 2 years.
Great advice. Thank you. Faith, and then Isabel.
I would say it really helped when teachers checked in on us. there wasn't really like an easier way to transition into like, full-time virtual learning. I know I had a few teachers that checked in on us. Like we just had days where we just talked about like the stress of work and stuff. Because not every teacher wanted to sit there for like an entire hour trying to teach us when some of us weren't paying attention, some of us weren't understanding, and some of us just weren't listening. And I think it was hard for all of us because we had to sit there for an hour and we weren't focusing. There was just a lot going on, and I think really checking in on us, asking if we're okay, and then also, like being able. I think it helped when teachers were able to say like they weren't okay, because we were all going through the same thing. So us just talking and checking in on each other really helped.
So it sounds like the teachers sort of being human and admitting that they were also having a hard time. I'm sure that would be really comforting to know that everyone's all in the same boat. All right, Ryan and then Macy.
Very thankful to be in a school where all the teachers are like very, very connected with the students in a level like I would say very personally. As for me, when getting disconnected March of 2020, I've built a bunch of relationships with my teachers that I probably would never done with any other school. I would say that during, I'd say March to June, the teachers would do a lot of mental health checks, even host like little Zoom meetings, like as if we're in a club, just to check in our emotional and social health and making sure we're okay. And same thing with junior year. We had office hours. We had times where we can meet with the teachers where they can discuss, like, obviously the education factor of school, but also the emotional factor and how they can perform better in the situation that we were in.
What's a question, Ryan, that a teacher would ask you that would feel really supportive? Because we had a comment about, sort of what kinds of questions that people might ask.
I think a really good question is, how are you feeling today? Because each and every day you could be feeling happy, the next day sad, the next day upset. It could be different days, a different emotion. And I think that would be the first question I would probably ask if I was a teacher, because that's like an initiative to say like, okay, we'll get through this together. I'm with you all the way. The offering, like a teacher offering their support would help the students not only perform better in school, but also help them with their social life and mental health.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Macy?
I just wanted to add on to what Faith said about teachers acknowledging that they're going through similar struggles. I think that there's immense power in acknowledging the struggle and calling it out and naming it for what it is. And I think I've had teachers through Zoom who have said, this sucks, but we're going to get through it together. And in acknowledging the struggle, calling it for what it is, not, pretending that everything's okay, I felt empowered to work through it because I understood that teachers are human, students are human, and we're all going to be able to work through this together. So I think that's what I would suggest to the school in Vietnam in making that transition as smooth as possible.
Thank you. Inoma?
I took advantage of the office hours that we had. During my junior year, we didn't have like completely like full days, so we had half days, and the last like 2 hours of the supposed like school day was for office hours where teachers and students could meet. I feel like that time, I think I should have taken more advantage of it, but I did my best. I really built like connections with my teachers. I was able to talk with them about like how I was dealing with the pandemic, as well as their experiences as well. Aside like from office hours, there were some days because I was an in-person student, so there were some days where I was one of like the only like 3 kids in the classroom, and like in those days, the teacher would be like, okay, for those of you like who are in class, how are you guys feeling today? Like what have you learned so far like during the school year? Because although learning was a priority, it didn't like supersede like our mental health. So our teacher, a lot of our teachers were very cognizant of that. They didn't want to like pile us like up on work and like let us be stressed with that. So like they acknowledged us and they asked us, okay, next week we're gonna do this. Are you guys comfortable with it? Like they asked us. I feel like having that like choice, of the option of like what like type of work that we're going to do like today or next week, or like what's the learning plan, so like a lot of my teachers kind of like included us in that process instead of, just having that, as an individual thing that a teacher does. So just being like included more in my education like process, as well as being cognizant of our mental health, as because everyone was going through like drastic things at the time.
Yeah.
So just be cognizant like of our mental health and education.
Yeah, that's great. And I think, like you said, giving students a bit of a voice in sort of how things are going to proceed probably was really helpful. Isabel?
Yes, so I would say that we are currently still in the transition mode into going all presentially, since we don't know when the government might say like, no, schools are shut down. We are still like handling it. So I would say this has all been a process. We have all been learning through it, and how the school has made this such a great experience at the time, being sometimes virtually, sometimes presentially, is by giving us the space to create. So personally, I have been supported by my directors and teachers by being able to join clubs and classes that I enjoy, that help me with my social and emotional health. Like, for example, having an innovative storytelling class. So how through this class I have had the opportunity to express my emotions and thoughts, and which has been liberating and has helped me grow as well. The school has given us the opportunity and, as I said, the space to create. I created my own club throughout the pandemic as well, and where we all create artistic expressions based on current global issues or personal things. So having a created environment where anyone can talk about their experiences and what we're going through is really what we need as students, having this space. So if you can also encourage students to create their own spaces, because sometimes it's hard to have that connection with teachers, because you might feel that, oh, because they're the adults, maybe I cannot say certain things. So giving the power to students to create and to motivate themselves to talk to each other, that's the biggest thing.
That's wonderful. Thank you. There was a question in the chat a little bit about this idea of how do we destigmatize mental health struggles? So, I mean, I think, and some of you have referenced this, that, struggling with your mental health is something that sometimes we don't like to talk about or we don't like to acknowledge. And so I just wondered, for our directors of counseling, so maybe we'll start with Kari, how have you helped students or let students know it's okay to say that you're struggling, and maybe even adults as well?
Yeah, no, the fear of coming and saying that I need help is real right now. And one of the things that, we've been trying to get out into our students, into our grade level meetings and our town meetings with our full school divisions, to tell students that it's okay to come to see our counseling team, and that sometimes if you or yourself or your friends might need help, it's okay to come and get help. I think a lot of times students don't know where to go, and we are just really starting now to try to get that to be more clear for them to know that they can come to us, not only that there's a problem that they might have when they come, that they might come to us just because they need somewhere to vent for the day, or the day is not going as they would like to, and they need a safe space to talk. And so I will say we're working on that, trying to get within our building to destigmatize coming to a counseling team member to talk. It's not easy, but we're trying to get the message out.
Great, thank you. Other adults have thoughts about that? Marcy?
Yeah.
Or go ahead. Who started? Go ahead, Ginger. I was gonna. Okay.
Yeah, I was just going to say that one of the things that we've done, and it starts with our teachers, is that we ask every day as part of our attendance, do you need counseling support for our teachers? And would you like someone to reach out to you today? Because what we know is people have a very hard time initiating that request. And so having that as part of our attendance, we actually created an app at the start of the pandemic that had people logging in that way and telling us about both their physical health, but also their mental health. And so I think that helped the teachers to think about their mental health in a different way, and that the school supported them so that they could support the students. And then having those one-on-ones, even all the way down to pre-K, having one-on-one conversations with kids.
So the app is for teachers specifically or for students specifically?
Yeah, it's for actually every faculty and staff member at the school has to kind of log in every morning and go through a series of questions to just see kind of how can we support you more, and are you coming to school today? And also making it okay when people needed time off, that people were not
able
told that made to feel bad if they needed extra time.
Yeah. Thank you. And someone in the chat had talked about supporting adults. And I just want to let you know that the webinar we had 2 weeks ago was specifically about supporting staff and adults. But I mean, it's very tied together, right? Because we can't help students if we don't, as adults, if we're not in the right place. Marcy?
Sure, I was just going to piggyback on that. Something that we did last year that we got really positive feedback from teachers is we devoted one professional learning day to teacher burnout and student engagement. And we did have a speaker join us and really did some activities with teachers to really address some of what they were going to. So just as was said, we can support the students better. And something that I would also recommend, we had to shift our advisory focus as well. And we really wanted it to be embedded into classrooms. So it wasn't just this separate idea of advisory, but really being part of the classroom environment. So something we put together as an SEL team was a catalog of different activities that were based on different outcomes. So there were some about self-management, some about self-awareness, and teachers, based on the needs of their individual students, could select from those activities and try them in the classroom as an opener or something to do at the end of class. And we got some really positive feedback about that.
Wonderful, thank you. I just want to remind people in the chat, if you can, try to direct your comments to everyone and not just to the host and panelists, so that everyone can see your comments. It's a different setting. Jackie?
Thank you. I was just going to add that I think there's, what it means to support adults in this year is even slightly more different and nuanced than supporting adults through last year, at least for us at St. Luke's, right? We were navigating hybrid learning, having kids on and off campus, and, really attending to who's on Zoom and who's in the classroom. But this year is a particularly challenging year when you think about the ways in which that kind of political strife that you mentioned at the beginning is kind of being conflated with all things related to social emotional learning and DEIB. And what I have noticed is that there's a real fear and anxiety that is mounting amongst our faculty for fear of saying or doing the wrong thing that might inflame the tensions in a community. And so I think, one of the things that Kari mentioned, right, and you reinforced, Allison, is this need to start with the adults. And I think it was mentioned in the chat, the need to reassure faculty that they are supported by the administration, that they are supported, in our case, by the board as well, so that we know that we're doing all of these things in service for our students. I think it's really easy sometimes for the students. The further removed from campus you are, it's harder to hold on to the fact that we're doing all of this in service of our students. And so one of the things that we're trying to do with our faculty is have some open conversation about what is our actual charge in caring for these kids and what is actually not our responsibility, and trying to navigate that is another nuanced challenge I think that most administrators might be able to appreciate. And I would only add that through our HR office, we offered also another kind of employee benefit. It seems little, but we all got free subscriptions to the Calm app, right? As a way to just kind of think about bringing our own energy down so that we can end each day and start each day in the right headspace.
Thank you. And there had been some questions about, technical solutions, but it sounds like there's some apps out there, other things. Anything else? Carla, did you have any other thoughts about bringing in resistant students, or even there was a couple of questions that came in before the webinar about, someone from a school of boys that was having a difficulty getting boys to sort of open up and talk about things, or, students who are resistant to sort of talking about their feelings, but that they're really struggling. Any thoughts about that?
And so that's why it was important for us to do presentations within the classroom, so that we're speaking to students as a group, and then those students that might be resistant or aren't used to talking or sharing in this way are experiencing other students, are experiencing their peers reaching out even within that format, and sharing. And there might be some things that a peer shares that they might be able to relate to. I do feel that one of the wonderful things that's come from COVID is that we are talking about mental health. It's a conversation. We're hearing the words, we're saying the words. And so I am experiencing, not just within our school community, but within our community here in Waterbury and the surrounding area, that people are reaching out. And so adults are reaching out. And when the children see that, it kind of gives them a really good example of that it's okay. And it's not just okay. Part of the checklist that I referred to earlier is that it's actually SMART. And instead of using, the terminology that we're asking for help, we're identifying what we need, and we're identifying trusted adults, and we're expressing what our needs are and getting those needs met, and how that is just SMART because we're taking care of ourselves. And the other thought in supporting staff is, obviously we've all heard you have to take care of yourself so that you can be there and take care of others, and really, really fanning that out and focusing on that has been a huge role of the support staff in the buildings within our system, and also the mental health, the clinical people like myself reaching out to our administration downtown and just letting them know, just what teachers are expressing, so that hopefully the supports will be built around that.
Right. Right, Ginger, last quick word, and then I want to give the last word to the students before we have to close.
Sure. I just wanted to share one thing that we did was not just recognizing where we needed to do things new and differently, but also where we needed to hold on to and celebrate some of our traditions that we had, so that kids feel still connected to their community. And so like things like certain celebrations where we would send a box of supplies to kids' homes so that they could celebrate together in the same way via Zoom. So I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah. I mean, I think keeping that normalcy is so important. So students, I want to give you the last word, and I would love for you to share with us an interaction or something a teacher or an adult did for you that was helpful, or something that you remember someone reaching out, just something positive that happened over the last 18 months that you will remember for a long time that happened to you. So let's start with Faith and Ryan.
I actually had a teacher drive to meet my mom so that she could drop off materials to me so that I could be included in the project that we were working on. And she did this more than once because we lived so close together. And I had another teacher who actually brought books from the library, and she dropped them off at my house. So that was helpful.
That's huge. Thank you. Thank you so much. Ryan?
Like one interaction is definitely with Miss Guglielmo, because even before the pandemic, she has been a phenomenal resource for my mental health since I was struggling, even before the pandemic. So I would like to give a huge thank you to her for all of those things I've put on her so that she can be a valuable resource and have my mental health be as best as it is today. And also, like, even with Mr. Johnson, like the amount of pressure on him, even like when we got disconnected to doing hybrid, it's now fully in person. I'm beyond impressed by how, especially like Waterbury Public Schools, managed to do such a thing. So I'm very happy with that.
Thank you. Thank you, Ryan. Anoma, can I call on you?
Yeah. I'll always remember she was my foreign language teacher. She was always very supportive. Like whenever I was struggling with an assignment, she would say like, okay, she would say like, come with me like after school and we can talk about it. So like I would never like be afraid to like, go to her and ask for help. So I guess like her support, especially like during that time, was something that like I'll never forget.
Awesome. Thank you. Isabel?
Yeah, so I have this one teacher who is she created a club with us, and her support has been incredible. She is always so happy, and she always promotes us to the whole school. She talks about our club. She's always has our best interest at heart. And also, like, when we had to do a presentation, a very important presentation, she stayed with us until like night, until we finished and had it all polished. And knowing that we had that moral support from her was amazing. She, like, that really was what impacted us.
Thank you. Lucas?
Just someone specific is Mr. Clark. He's our tag teacher actually, and he just gives us like a nice time in the classroom. The classroom is like a good environment just to be around and talk. I mean, talk as in productive, not just messing around. We actually get things done, but we get things done in a rather organized and fun way. Even college stuff. We do college stuff. We do just activities. Actually, we do activities about the psyche and our personality. And it's just nice to actually like talk and share our personality without being closed in a more strict environment. It's just nice to appreciate that every now and then.
Sounds like you can be yourself, which is really important. All right, Macy and Karanda, and then we'll go back to those who raised their hands.
Yeah, last year I had a Spanish teacher who every first time that we met during the week, so it was normally on a Tuesday, she would hand out whiteboards and we would write, I am thankful for blank, and then you would say so-and-so, and then you would address them in the class and you would say it in Spanish and explain why you were thankful for them. And you would look at each other, give that appreciation, make that eye contact, and then sit down, and it would just go around the room. And it was something that became consistent and weekly, and it not only allowed us to practice our Spanish and our verb conjugations, but also gave us a network to just say, I appreciate you and I see you. So that was awesome.
That's wonderful. And reminds me of what Ginger said about holding space for gratitude along with the stress and the anxiety, right? We've all talked about positive things that have come, but then along with the stress and the anxiety. Thank you so much. Karanda?
From the beginning of the pandemic till now, I've had some teachers who will reach out to like fellow students or me and just say like, hi, like I miss you, or like this remind me of you, or like I thought you would like this. So, it's like keeping us in mind even when we weren't with each other. And I've had a lot of positive interactions with teachers at my school, especially since it's so like tight knit. There's not a lot, it's not like an overwhelmingly large school. So, most teachers know most students, and it's kind of like a family aspect. So it's really awesome.
Okay. So really quickly, Faith and Ryan, last two thoughts.
I know I definitely unloaded a lot on Ms. Nelson over the past year or so. And I had a world language teacher last year who would stay with me after Zoom, and she would just ask if I was okay. And I know I broke down like a few times because I think that's a very loaded question. But like it really helped a lot to talk about things. Yeah.
That's wonderful. Thank you. Ryan?
Just to finish off with Lucas's point, like having a teacher like Clark and having a class with with TAG definitely creates a safe space so which we can have all our pressures relieved from education and everything that's going on.
Great, thank you. And I wanted to end with that question because I think it's really important for educators to hear that students remember, right? Those moments when you reached out and when you asked them how they were doing and when you made those efforts. And I think that is such an important point. And so our time is gone for today. We knew it would go fast, especially with as many people as we have. And we want to thank so much our panelists for everything that you shared, particularly our students for sharing such personal thoughts about your feelings and your reflections about the pandemic. And we really, really appreciate that. I'd like to turn it back over to Kelly, who's going to finish up for us this morning.
Thank you so much, everyone. I just put it in the chat, but I want to say it again. As adults, we are still navigating, understanding our own experiences of the pandemic. And it was so humbling and inspiring to hear from each of you students so articulately, deeply, and openly about both your challenges and your growth. I think we all took a lot away from this session. Thank you to all of you for joining from around the world. And thank you to each of you, adult and student panelists joining us today. Thank you, and we'll see you next time.